So, The Idol.
So you miss it?
Getting hit?
The motivation it gave you?
Okay. It's not good. Welcome to part 2 of my sex politics series. I hope that you enjoy or are somehow enlightened by today's topic of sexual liberation. I will be exploring what it looks like when patriarchy has co-opted it and thinking of potential ways that it can be reclaimed. For those who haven't seen The Idol and don't plan on doing so, the story follows Jocelyn, a pop star who most likely started when she was very young. In the first episode, it's confirmed that Jocelyn has had a lot of mental health struggles, partly caused by her mother's death, at which she was present. This trauma compounds the pressure to continue being an idol, which results in a severe mental breakdown that eventually leads to her being institutionalized. What's sad is that I think I can speak on behalf of most people who've seen it or know about any of the background of the show, is that the plot had potential, but horrific writing and embarrassing dialogue aside, the worst element about The Weeknd and Sam Levinson's The Idol is the fact that it tries to paint over its direct objectification of women with sexual liberation. The problem is not with sexual liberation itself. No, what's wrong is that the patriarchy has turned this revolutionary ideology of sexual liberation to sexual availability for men, rather than an embrace of one's own sexual agency. For this video, I will be using Dr. Caroline Heldman's outline for sexual objectification to analyze how The Idol uses it. Okay, so how does sexual liberation have anything to do with The Idol and it being a very probable rape fantasy? Well, to be frank, a lot of women and people generally, regardless of gender, do have certain fantasies or kinks or fetishes about, like, consensual non-consent, I think is the official term for it. Obviously, as long as the enactment of these fantasies is consensual, then cool. But I can't help but wonder why, out of all the possible ways to portray sex and or kink, The Idol chose to go with sexual violence and a rape fantasy. The Idol portrays violent sex as something women are expected to endure. The story is told completely from a man's point of view. One of the scenes has Jocelyn talking with her assistant and best friend Leia about a club owner named Tedros, otherwise known as The Weeknd, that she wants to invite over. When Leia tells her the guy has rapey vibes and just shows concern for Jocelyn allowing this man into her life, Jocelyn responds with, "Yeah, I kinda like that about him though." Who exactly was this line written for? It certainly wasn't written for a female demographic, I think is safe to assume. Even in Jocelyn's masturbation scenes, she's positioned doing so in a conventionally attractive way, as though she knows she's being observed, perhaps because she is, by us, the viewers. Her self-pleasure is always framed as a performance, regardless, even when no one is there. Her body is displayed in a fragmented way. Again, it just seems like she behaves and speaks in a way that follows a male fantasy script, if you know what I mean. In other words, the show objectifies her. I'm going to refer to, as I'd mentioned previously, Dr. Heldman's definitions of objectification, as her analysis provides a very simple and straightforward way of spotting objectification in media. In the Sexy Lie TED Talk, Dr. Heldman identifies objectification by giving a list of questions to ask. I won't include all of them, but I do think the majority of these questions help us to see how The Idol objectifies its women. 1. Does the image show only parts of a sexualized person's body? 2, does the image show a sexualized person as interchangeable? 4, does the image affirm the idea of violating the bodily integrity of a sexualized person that can't consent? And 5, does the image suggest that sexual availability is the defining characteristic of the person? So we already answered question 1. For question 3, I would argue that although Jocelyn and the other female characters do have personality traits, kind of, and I guess like a couple of the male members of the club and the backup dancers are somewhat sexualized as well, the way that the show depicts its women makes it as though they're interchangeable with each other because, depending on the character, they are conventionally attractive and because of their careers. For example, the assistant Leia does not have the body and does not look the same as Jocelyn or the other really over-sexualized female characters in the show. And she's not open about her sexuality in the same way that Jocelyn and the other characters get to be. I actually thought for a second that the show's intention was to comment on this, but it was soon clear that this expectation was overly optimistic, to say the least. The whole thing instead comes across like they're using social commentary as an excuse to show and glamorize these women being treated like replaceable sex objects, rather than disavowing this form of dehumanization. Levinson and his fans have already used the "it's so real, that's why people are uncomfortable" excuse for Euphoria, and I'm sorry, but you guys are not fooling anyone. For question 4, Tedros the Weeknd fundamentally violates Jocelyn just by being the character that he is. He lies about his identity, his business, his employees. This is not a surprising thing, as the show is technically about a cult, and this is what cult leaders and cult members do: deceive. But again, the way that the show frames it does not come across as spreading awareness. It just uses a cool film camera and a boatload of Weeknd songs. Jocelyn does not have the capacity to consent at all, as Tedros lies to her about literally everything. She doesn't have the information she needs to truly consent to sex with Tedros, or to have him be this invested in her life. To answer question 5, does the image suggest that sexual availability is the defining characteristic of the person? Yes. Almost everything about Jocelyn is somehow tied back to sex. Now, showing hypersexuality or just using sex as a coping mechanism is one thing. Directly sexualizing the trauma itself is another. As I said before, we know from the very first scenes of the whole show that Jocelyn has had a lot of grief to work through. We learn later on in the story that it's even more complicated than that because of how abusive her mother was. The show only truly empathizes with Jocelyn in a couple of scenes where she's having a breakdown during a music video shoot. So it seemed like the show may have been going into a better direction, but what made me completely change my mind and lose all hope again were the very next scenes. They always follow up a genuine portrayal of Jocelyn and her trauma with softcore porn of either Jocelyn or the other female characters. The women in this show are not shown to have any really capability of having a healthy sexual relationship or a healthy relationship with sexuality generally. And at the same time, sex at the end of the day is what defines them entirely in The Idol. This is not sexual liberation. This is not sex positivity. This is not too real. Even when women are suffering, they are expected to do so in a pleasing, sexy way. It's not freedom in any sense of the word. It's just a different branding for the same bigotry. I don't know about you, but after watching The Idol, I felt like I had to take a shower and cleanse myself of whatever that was. I felt hopeless in a way because it's like, we're in 2023. So what's a good example of a truly sex positive show? Drum roll, please. Sex Education. I cannot, and many other people probably cannot speak highly enough about this show. First off, it's just really enjoyable. Besides the refreshing and sometimes comedic depiction of what sex and people are really like, Sex Education does confront some incredibly sensitive topics. One of the main characters, Amy Gibbs, for example, gets sexually assaulted on a bus. The other main female characters have also had their experiences with sexual harassment. Eric Efeong is the survivor of a hate crime. Jackson Marchetti suffers from crippling anxiety and even at one point starts to self-harm. Maeve Wiley's family abandoned her. And still, although the entire plot is based around sex, technically, none of this suffering is sexualized or glamorized in any way. This may sound crazy and paradoxical, but even the sex itself in Sex Education isn't sexualized. I praise how all of these characters and storylines have been written, but I think, at least in terms of this video, the showrunners of Sex Education and the writers really shined in how they wrote female characters. See, unlike The Idol, the characters in Sex Education have sexual agency along with their pain and complexity. I highly, highly recommend that you watch Sex Education if you haven't already. I'm sure most of you have. It really is a breath of fresh air. So, to conclude this chapter, what I want people to gather mainly is that the point of sexual freedom as an ideology and a movement is to liberate from performance and objectification, not play into it because it's sexy or makes money. It's not about being desirable, it's about embracing our own desire. Plastering sex and nudity onto everything in a TV show, as tasteless as The Idol does it, is not freeing. Sexualizing and glorifying trauma doesn't make you real or different. You can't simply call yourself a feminist and then call it a day. So what did you think of The Idol or of any other deceptive portrayals of sex positivity that you've seen? How do you think we can truly liberate ourselves? Well, I will leave you with that. I will see you next time.